How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Ganji. Welcome to another episode of Chair Talk, guys. So there's been a recent update put out by TMZ, says that the police called to Celeste Rivas' home 11 times. And I feel like the narrative shifted with TMZ because at once they were trying to work with the family, and now they're putting out these articles that really don't have context, but some people are going to run with it at a very surface level. I saw that they did an episode the other day when they interviewed the ex-boyfriend, and they were trying to talk about problems at home, and basically she said she was going to run away multiple times. And there's going to be a bulk of our episode that we're going to discuss right here. What does a troubled home really mean? Because again, troubled home, where's the context here? But with that said, this is not about absolutes. You know, one thing in corrections that I think plays out here is that you try to never limit yourself to just either or options or either or choices. You try to see possibilities. That's the key. You try to see possibilities. I am watching so many people doing their podcast, doing their YouTube channel, just throwing stuff out there with an update that is really not as big as they're making it out to be. Like the boyfriend was a big update, and today's update about the police going to the home 11 times. And again, most people, when they look at articles, they only look at the title and then they run with the title. But then when you open up the article, it's got a little more to it. But most likely you got to read a little further down because, again, they got to entice people. So right now, I think they're going with the argument that the home was a troubled home, and all they really have to lean on that is the fact that she said she was going to run away. And then, yes, guys, there were some videos I have posted up of Celeste Rivas. I did a video on that was outside of the that was inside the timeline of her gone missing for the longer period of time. But again, we still don't have context. You know, we still don't have, you know, I think now we know it may be her, but we still don't know where she went after that meeting. Didn't say she went back home with her mother or father. I mean, the only concern I had is when they went to go speak to the father, and the father really didn't care as much, or that's what's being told to us. But it's like they're not talking to the family. Maybe the family kind of went incognito a little bit because they went from getting help to now being the target of troubled home. But again, with no context. And I don't want to taint a family that could be possibly grieving by continuing the narrative of a troubled home, and that has to mean, and then put our own interpretation of what we feel a troubled home may be. I mean, the stuff that's being thrown out there, just in absolutes, is just, it went from troubled home to that she's being abused and all this other stuff, but there really is no context in how troubled homes should be perceived. And I think in all these cases right now that I've been looking at, but really now focusing on this one, is that there's always lessons that you can pull, especially when there's no updates. You can try to pull a lesson that could be applied in other scenarios that has a longer lasting impact. Because at the end of the day, people are chasing after these type of cases because they want to give voice to the victim. I saw that with Emmanuel Harrow, with Justice for Emmanuel. You're seeing it now with Celeste Rivas Hernandez, Justice for Celeste. So we want to make sure that we give them a name past them being just a victim. So what can we take from what happened, and what can we learn from it so their name lives on in a manner that is worth recognition, as opposed to just being the victim when technically they're a life and they're worth a lot more than just being labeled a victim. So again, TMZ, a little summary of their articles. According to police records obtained by TMZ, Riverside County Sheriff's deputies were called to Celeste Rivas's Lake Elsinore home 11 times. So they emphasize that right on the title, 11 times between February 2024 and April of 2025. 3 of those calls came in a single day, March 19, 2024. The same day, Celeste ran from home and was captured on nearby liquor store surveillance footage. Deputies responded twice to her home and once to the liquor store. So you see that these 3 calls right now, and by the way, one was the liquor store, but they made it look like it was 11 times at the home, but it's all related to that time she ran away. Nearly all the calls were logged as minor crime investigations because maybe, that's how they do it. Maybe they look at a runaway and could she have been abducted? We don't know. But at this point, maybe because she ran away frequently, they just put it down as a simple investigation. Maybe the word crime is pre-applied or applied too soon. And one was marked suspicious circumstances. So basically, maybe when they saw the car and they saw her picked up by a vehicle, if that was determined, maybe that's what elevated it to a suspicious circumstance. Reports were taken in 4 of the incidents, and police scheduled follow-ups on 3 other ones. Now that's very vague. But then they said on April 5th, 2024, deputies responded to her house at 9:29 p.m., just a half hour after the family had filed a missing persons report. So far we've seen 4 of those 11 times have been related to her gone missing. And we also know she's a frequent runaway. So those 11 times could be them calling the police and trying to figure out where she went. And that's a possibility that is not being mentioned anymore. Again, I'm not saying that the home was perfect because I really don't know. None of us really know. But to jump to the conclusion that it was a troubled home filled with abuse and all this other stuff, I don't think that's correct just yet. You don't know that just yet. And again, for TMZ, you put an article here that, kind of coincides with the narrative until you read it a little bit deeper. In corrections, we read reports, and sometimes people put all this stuff at the beginning. At the very end is the main thing you have to worry about. But most people may not read the whole thing because they figure they get the gist, and then they move on to the next thing. And at the end of the day, they run with this assumption that really is not what was originally written, but you waited to put the truth, the real detail. You waited and you put it at the bottom. But it's okay because you could still say, well, we wrote it. Yeah, but you wrote it in such a way or such a structure that most of the people that are busy with their day or just scrolling through something, they're not going to read all the way to the bottom for the final context. They barely get past, in most cases, the title. So the title, it eventually becomes how people see or see what they're reading. It biases what they're reading. And then if they read the whole thing, to put everything at the bottom, when most people may not even get to the bottom, just sends a different message out. But it covers them because they wrote it. But sometimes you write things because you want to get the click or you want to get the view. But it could be very, very misleading. And a lot of people will run with that because they don't have the attention span to really follow through and go through all the other blurb just to get to what you're really trying to get at. And somewhere along the line, where the biggest proof is that we know that David had a connection to her. And now all of a sudden, I don't see that mentioned as much anymore. And even if this connection was supposedly now this mentor thing where he was trying to help out when she was reported missing, then why not bring her back? Why not do the right thing? The shift that has happened recently and just kind of everything on the family, it's crazy how quick these narratives switch. So again, the TMZ pieces, the TMZ piece frames the history as part of a troubled home life, but the timeline clearly overlaps with her pattern of running away. That distinction matters. What police were often responding to may have been runaway-related incidences rather than domestic dysfunction. And guys, I'm not saying that everything perfectly fits in this puzzle. This is a very confusing case. I mean, it is. And we're going to have a lot of what-ifs. But, there's context here that is not being fed to us, and there's more out there that's not being fed to us. And right now, as the narrative starts to shift, I mean, how much of it do we lean on and think that's really our own thoughts? or how much is it that we're being influenced without even realizing it? I mean, that's the key. I mean, I'm not really big on attacking a family that could be mourning, even if it may not been a perfect life. I get it, but let's talk about troubled homes. And remember, guys, the sister went to the liquor store looking for her. I mean, there's evidence that the family tried. Now, granted, it could have been a broken family, but I just don't think there's enough to run with that. And I'm not saying it didn't happen, but what about if we're wrong and the family really is mourning? I mean, got to give us something a little bit more definitive. And yes, you put out there 11 times they visit the home, but yeah, as you can see, most of it's related to the Runaways. So I just want to kind of now touch on troubled home. What does that really mean in context, guys? I worked on this all day. I'm going to try to read through it. I answered as many questions as I could to give a better understanding of the different perspectives of what a troubled home could be. And again, as in my line of work, you always look for more than one or two answers. Never limit yourself to either or. Sometimes we wind up asking ourselves questions that limit us to just two options or two choices when technically life is complex. I wish things were easy and that they were black and white. You know, this story here shifted from him grooming her and manufacturing the runaway, because that will be mentioned here, to oppose that she was pushed out. And the motivation was because of an abusive home or a troubled home. Well, how do we know that the person that was grooming her didn't paint that perspective so that's what she saw? The proof that we have is his connection to her. Connection dating back to when she was 11 or 12. And again, you know, I think there's so much of a connection there that it at least raises the question, what was that connection truly about? And even if you were trying to mentor her when she was gone missing, why would you not do what you can to return her back or let the police know where she's at? Do the right thing. Would you hide her to protect her from her family? Come on. If there was a concern at the home that was a reportable concern, you didn't have to hide her. You could have reported it. And then you could see what happens next. And you could have been involved in that side of the justice. But it's just weird how so many things change. I mean, some of the people I follow have led to the absolute that she ran away because of either two things. She has a mental health concern or she was abused or something in the family. Those are the only two reasons why people run away from home. I walked around work today and asked a few people about, give me some reasons why people would run away from home. And there's multiple reasons. And some of them, a lot of them come from good homes. You know why? You know what most of them said? They were running towards something. What they thought was love or superficial love. You know, someone that got them. They were running towards somebody. And somehow in these last couple of articles that TMZ's putting out, it lost that narrative. No offense, TMZ. I get it. You know, I get it. But what about if you're wrong? You know, what about, you know, again, we could promote the possibilities, and I'll explain that. I covered so many things here real quick. Let me just go ahead and read it because there's a lot that I'm going to cover. So Celeste case, let me show you Celeste again, just so in case people aren't familiar. But if you want to really know the details of the case, guys, I've done multiple videos on this. But basically, Celeste's body was found in that gentleman's vehicle, a vehicle that was registered to him. It was a Tesla, and she was found on September 8th, a day after her 15th birthday. She was found deceased. Right now, we don't know the cause of death. It could have been accidental, it could have been homicide. We don't know yet. But that's just the end result. There's so many things that are twisting and turning here. So Celeste's case has become one of the most talked about tragedies of 2025. So at just 15, her body was found hidden in the trunk of a Tesla. So there it is right there. The frunk of a Tesla, sorry. But long before that discovery, media outlets repeatedly described her as coming from a troubled home. So since there's really no strong updates, I want to focus on troubled home. That phrase, troubled home, is both powerful and problematic. What does it really mean? Is it fact or perception? And how does it connect to the bigger question of why kids like Celeste run away? So, guys, I'm answering some of the questions that were sent to me, but also some of the questions that I felt would be good to answer based on the recent shift in narrative. So the show unpacks 10 key okay, so this show is actually going to be, I got 10 key reasons why teens run away, but I'm also going to be asking what we as a community need to do differently when faced with these warning signs. So I got a mixture of a couple of things here. And like I said, I try to always look for something to learn from the tragedy, and then also how we could play a role in not letting it happen again, like we did with Emmanuel Harrow, where we're trying to put together a petition for registered child abusers, maybe for Christine, what's her name? The female teacher who molested her students, how we got to get a little bit more information and understanding of female sex offenders, because they're just as dangerous as male sex offenders, but they're not seen in the same light. We did things quickly about a hot car death and how that is still a concern. So when there's no update, let's see what you can learn overall, because at the end of the day, it's not about just chasing headlines. It's how do we help, make sure this doesn't happen again. And what a great way for the victim to have a voice. What a great way for the victim to have a voice where we can learn something and their death doesn't have to be in vain. And again, these are just possibilities. You really don't know enough to hold on to anything definitively, but I just want to explain how a troubled home could be viewed. Because remember, she kept on telling everybody, I'm going to run away. I'm going to run away. But no one has answered why she said she was going to run away. The only thing they say is that she's running to David. That's the why. She may not, or maybe she said, David, I'm with, whatever it is, but no one has said she's running away because home's like this. I'm running away. I'm running away. And most of the time they're saying David. Everybody seems to know there's a David. So she must have said, I'm running away because I probably want to see David. So again, when you hear the phrase troubled home, what do you think it means in Celeste's case? So guys, these questions I'm answering, feel free to answer them in the comments as well. Make it more of an engagement. I like that so I can learn from you guys as well, because I'm learning in the process too. So to be honest, what we think it means may have very little relevance to how young teenage girl like Celeste would define it. So troubled home is one of those loaded terms. It sounds absolute, but in reality, it's extremely subjective, especially from the perspective of a teenager. Think about it. The only information we're getting about Celeste's so-called troubled home comes secondhand from what she may have told peers or friends, but there's no context. Did she mean abuse? Did she mean neglect? Or did she mean something much more ordinary, like rules she didn't agree with, arguments with her parents, or feelings of being misunderstood? So for a teenager, a troubled home doesn't necessarily mean violence or danger. It could mean a curfew that feels unfair, parents questioning her friendships, or being told no when she thought she was ready for more independence. Sounds a lot like Celeste. I know a lot of people think that maybe the parents accepted her relationship with David, but maybe they knew very little about who David was. We can't assume that they knew who David was. All she knew that the name was David, and when she ran away, hey, we're going to report it, because they reported it. They were receiving anything. Why would they report it? Why would they put himself on the map? So to a young mind, those things can feel crushing, even though to parents, they're simply normal boundaries. What feels like protection to a mom or dad might feel like control to a 14-year-old girl. So, and there's another critical factor, grooming. If Celeste was being groomed, then her perspective on her parents may not have been entirely her own. A groomer often works to undermine trust in the family by planting ideas like your parents don't understand you, or you'd be happier with me. Remember, she wanted to go to a concert. They didn't want her going to the concert. So he goes, I'll fix that. If Celeste was in a relationship or even just heavy contact with D4BD David during this period, her view of home life could have been shaped, even manipulated by that outside influence. What she called trouble might not have been her independent conclusion at all. Now, is that a possibility? Of course, that's a possibility. That's a very reasonable possibility. When you're investigating things from the ground up. You got to look at possibilities and probabilities. You have to look at whatever could be a concern. So with that said, I think that 100% makes sense. And that was a strong possibility only but a few days ago. Should the media repeat that label without verified evidence? So the label of troubled home, because it's out there and it's being defined in so many different ways, but the big momentum, I think, is the push by the media to define it in this one isolated fashion, that the troubled home must have been bad parents who were abusive or whatnot, and she was looking to escape. Now, granted, again, whether it happened or not, but the point is, let's showcase the other possibility. They're pigeonholing troubled home into such a strict definition, when really troubled home could be totally subjective. So this is where the problem really lies. The phrase troubled home is now attached to Celeste's name everywhere, but we don't actually know what she meant by it, or even if she ever used it in the way the media is suggesting. If I'm correct, Celeste had siblings, at least a brother and a sister, who lived in the same home. If there were real, verified concerns, you would expect context. CPS reports are more evidence of systemic issues. But right now, all we have is hearsay from a teenager without context. And yet the media has taken that vague idea and run rampant with it, shaping public opinion. Everyone fills in the blank with their own definition of what troubled looks like, and that unfairly shifts the narrative. Instead of focusing on reality, we're projecting assumptions. So at the end of the day, this isn't about what the media thinks or what the public speculates. It's about the facts. Was the home truly troubled, or are we letting a teenager's subjective perspective, possibly influenced by grooming, become the story without ever digging into the truth? And the reason why I'm passionate about it is I deal with manipulation. I have a book on manipulation. I write books on manipulation. They gaslight. They position themselves to have influence where people wind up second guessing themselves. I mean, now all of a sudden things are shifting, and now we forget that she was groomed. How much of what she's saying to people about her troubled home really had any context outside the fact that it could have been surfaced because it was influenced? I'm not saying, I just got to keep on. My OCD here. I got to keep on saying that. I'm not saying it could have been truly a home that was a bad home, but we don't know that yet. And if you're wrong at a time when they're grieving, it doesn't even give them a chance to grieve. They're just going to have to defend their position. And again, the one show I watched, I'm a little upset because I like the guy, but to say that people only run away because of mental health concerns or because they're being abused, those are the only two reasons. And as an officer, I love you to death. It's not personal, but I manage a law enforcement agency. You don't limit yourself to either or. To say that these are the only two reasons eliminates the complexity of human decision, or just being human in general, being a teenage girl in general. You think you could understand? I have a teenage girl. You think are going to be a teenager? You can't understand. And try to limit their decision-making to either or scenarios, black or white. It's so much more complex. So they talked about family conflict, right? So conflict, what does that mean? What does conflict mean? So again, there's no context here. So the first thing I could say is conflict could be something about a perspective or a view. I could have conflict with people I love all the time. It happens. We're not always going to be in agreement. So for here, I put conflict. Okay, maybe there's a parent's view. Arguments are part of family life. Parents might see yelling or disagreements as normal discipline or as stress spilling over from work or finances. It happens. And then a teen's view, to a teen, conflict could be a repeated yelling or constant criticism that doesn't feel routine. It feels personal and overwhelming. Even though it could be routine, but to them it feels personal or overwhelming the way they perceive it. And what a parent views as guidance, a child may experience as rejection or hostility. So Celeste's ex-boyfriend said she sometimes joked about running away and described her home as unhappy. Even if the conflict wasn't extreme, perception matters. Unhappy. Why were you unhappy? Because you didn't have the freedom to go to Dave's concert? Would that be a concern? Because we made the assumption that she's been in contact with him since she was 11 till her untimely death at 14, but technically she was 15 when they discovered her. But unhappy about what? Unhappy about what? Why did we not ask those questions? The kid was right there when she said she was running away. What was she running away from? Can you explain that? And what would she say she was unhappy about? And I bet you most likely, and I could be wrong, unhappiness would be my parents would understand me, blah, blah, blah. And then you would find out the true thing would be, well, they wouldn't let me go to a concert. And that's what started it all. Because maybe at the end of the day, when you're young, and I'll explain this too, you don't know how to explain your feelings. So you use the most simplest word maybe to explain it. But she could have just been unhappy because she didn't get what she wanted. That doesn't make it a bad home. It could be a home of accountability or helping someone make better choices. You don't always get what you want. But when you're a kid, you expect it. If not, you're being wronged because level of reasoning is so superficial at that age. So do you think family conflict alone can drive a teen to keep running away? Yes, because for many teens, running away becomes the immediate form of escape. And here's the tragedy. Once that escape happens, it can become normalized. A teenager learns when things get tense, I leave, and that pattern can stick. So family conflict can come from the most ordinary things, money struggles, the stress of raising kids, balancing job, household responsibilities. For parents, these conflicts are part of life. But for a young mind, it can all feel overwhelming and confusing. But it's not just conflict between parents or general household stress. Sometimes the real friction exists directly in the parent-child dynamic. Parents set rules, curfews, and expectations because they believe it's their responsibility to guide and protect. But for a teen, those same rules can feel like constant judgment, a lack of trust, or proof that they're not being seen as capable. What parents view as healthy structure, teens can experience as conflict. That's why many teens choose escape. It's not always that they're being forced out of the home. It's that they're trying to avoid or outrun tension, whether that tension is between parents or within their own relationship with the parents. So again, it's not that the conflict's pushing them out, but rather they're looking to avoid it. And guys, I'm going to have a mental health expert on tomorrow, Denise Sharmwall, again, to kind of discuss this more in detail, because I do believe there's a lot here to unfold, why we get the updates, because I want to take advantage of topics like this because it's in the forefront now. I wasn't worried about runaways a couple of weeks ago, but now I am, because now it's in front of us. So, but running away isn't only about avoiding discomfort. For many teens, it's also about creating a sense of control and freedom they don't feel inside the home. When you're 14 or 15, your entire life is built on rules set by others. What time to be home, who you can see, what you can do on your phone, walking out the door, even for a night, can feel like taking back power, like finally making a decision that belongs to them. And she did that a lot. And if you watch that video, which is within the time frame she's gone missing, again, that's still got to be something to be explored. I'm not saying that's nothing that there's a break in the timeline there. I get it. But you also can see that this girl is an independent thinker. She chases things. So I agree with that. Sometimes you just want to break free just to have that sense of freedom. The problem, of course, is that this freedom is an illusion. Okay, the streets or an unsafe friend's couch or a risky online contact can't provide the safety or structure that a family, even a conflicted one, does. But in the moment, the runaway sees it as a relief and control, but in the moment, the runaway sees it as relief, as control, and as breathing space. Now, connecting this carefully to Celeste's case, we know she had repeated runaway episodes. That pattern could suggest that when conflict arose, whether between her parents or in her own battles with potential expectations, leaving became her way of coping. We don't know the full details, but the cycle of conflict, escape, return is sadly common in cases like hers. This happens a lot, especially with groomers. They manufacture the runaway And then they maintain a tether or a control. So the runaway keeps coming back, because when they look for that independence and they break away from the family, they're still dependent. They got to go somewhere. So they're not really forming their own independence. They're shifting their dependency. It's just with less rules, less conflict. So should conflict be seen as a red flag, sorry guys, it closed off. Should conflict be seen as a red flag even if it isn't abuse? So this is such an important distinction. Abuse and conflict are not the same thing, and we should never put them under the same umbrella. If we label all conflict as abuse, we minimize the seriousness of real abuse cases. Abuse is deliberate harm, physical, emotional, or otherwise. Conflict, on the other hand, is part of family life. Every household has disagreements, arguments, and stressful moments, because we're seeing conflict with parents. That's being out there too. Conflicts with parents. That said, conflict with the parent-child role is often where the danger lies, because a parent may think, I'm setting rules for your safety. When I say danger, I'm talking about danger of the child running away, a motivation in their mind. So that said, conflict within the parent-child role is often where the danger lies. A parent may think, I'm setting rules for your safety, while the teen interprets these same rules as unfair, controlling, or proof that they're not trusted. If that tension escalates with yelling, criticism, or constant battles over independence, it can erode the relationship even without abuse. So yes, conflict should be taken seriously, but not automatically treated as abuse. What matters is how it's expressed and how it's resolved. Constructive conflict can teach resilience. Toxic conflict, even without violence, can leave a teen feeling trapped. So again, there's a spectrum of conflict as well. In the context of Celeste, it's possible that normal family conflict was perceived by her as unbearable, especially if it clashed with her own desires for independence or was amplified by outside grooming influences. Without context, we risk either overemphasizing normal conflict or underestimating true abuse, and both could lead us away from the truth. Now, I want to talk about strict controlling parenting. Well, strict or controlling parents. So the parents may view things, because that could be a concern. Maybe you have parents that are too overprotective or too strict. So they believe that rules equal love. Parents enforce curfews, limit phone use, or monitor friends to keep kids safe. And this is a tough age, right? Because this is when the kids want their freedom. And this is where they become, you get the most concerned. So how do you balance that? And the teen's view is restrictions feel like suffocation. What parents see as protection, teens interpret as mistrust or lack of independence. And when limits pile up, some teens start to see home as a cage and not a safety net. It's possible. High possibility. Where's the line between healthy discipline and a home environment that feels controlling? All right, so this is one of the hardest balances for parents to get right and for teenagers to understand. So from the parent's perspective, discipline is about protection. It's about setting boundaries that keep a child safe while gradually preparing them for independence. But from the teenager's perspective, those same rules can feel suffocating. They're old enough to crave freedom, but not yet mature enough to fully grasp the risk that comes with it. Here's the key. The balance is set by the parent, not by the skewed or immature expectations of a teen who simply wants total freedom. The balance is set by the parent. That doesn't mean parents shouldn't listen. It means they have the responsibility to know when to hold the line. At the same time, discipline should grow into trust. I say this in corrections. We have a saying, trust but verify. That's how layered trust works. And I'm not talking about the inmates, guys. I'm in prison management. So I'm not tossing out trust for my correctional staff to think that I'm telling you to trust inmates. I'm talking about when you start overseeing bigger areas and you have more people that you oversee that are in professional roles. You know, I do trust and then verify, you know, just to make sure that we're all on the same page. So I want to make that clear. I did not push a message for us to blindly trust inmates, because I do have a correctional audience that watches this. So I don't want them to get lost in what I just said. So that is more for me in management as I delegate my directives further down the line. So again, trust but verify. That's how layered trust works. A teen earns responsibility in stages, maybe a later curfew, a little more freedom, more privacy, but those privileges can also be removed if trust is violated. So accountability in this effort matters. The challenge is that this layered approach doesn't always translate to a teenager's perspective. They don't see the trust and verify process. They only feel the restrictions. So what a parent views as gradual independence, a teen might experience as being controlled. That gap in perception is where conflict often grows. And guys, again, these are all possibilities, but this is a great way, open way to understand the teenage perspective, or the superficial perspective of a conflicted home without having any context. This gives some level of context. These are questions that during the investigation, if you're investigating a home that could be troubled, these are things that you are going to have to find out. What does troubled mean? And from whose perspective? So should strict parenting be considered a factor in runaway risk? Yes, because strict parenting can be a factor in why children run away, but it's not as simple as labeling all strict parents as bad parents. Strictness is deeply subjective. One team may interpret rules as structure and love, while another interprets the very same rules as control and unfairness. What matters isn't just the rule itself, but the relationship and the communication around it. That said, we need to be careful. If strict parenting comes from a place of genuine care, from parents who are protective, maybe even overprotective, then they don't deserve to be unfairly judged or labeled. If society or media automatically cast strict parents as the villains, it pushes them into a defensive corner. And when parents feel attacked, they're less likely to be open to dialogue or to adjust their approach. On the other hand, if strictness comes with anger, humiliation, or a lack of explanation, then yes, it increases the risk of a teen running away, because what the parent calls structure, the teen experiences as suffocation. So context matters. Strictness doesn't automatically mean dysfunction. But it absolutely should be considered in runaway cases because it provides deeper insight into how a teen interpreted their home environment and why escape felt like their only option. So again, when Celeste was telling people I'm running away, they were just saying to who? David? Because it seems to be everybody knew David. So she was probably in there saying who she was going to run away to. But when you ask them, you're from troubled home or problems at home, but no one seems to know what that is. They seem to know more about what she was running to than what she was running away from. Everybody knew she was with David, including her family, but I think the family truly did not know who David was. And again, just a possibility. Don't attack the messenger, because I'm only going by what I'm given. So I want to talk about emotional neglect. So the parent's view is, basically maybe I provide food, a home, and clothes. Isn't that enough? Parents may not realize emotional connections is just as important as physical care. I mean, remember, there are some parents, especially in the Latino culture, that basically I'm a provider. So I don't need to spend this time. I'm going to give you food. I'm going to give you clothing. I'm doing my part. But kids may want more than that, or should get more than that. A teen's view is a child who feels unheard or unseen may interpret silence as abandonment. A lack of attention can feel as painful as outright rejection. So one of the questions I got was, can a child feel neglected even if parents believe they're doing their best? Yes. And this is where things get complicated. Neglect can be extremely subjective, especially through the eyes of a teenager. A teen might say they feel neglected, but what they mean could range from very serious, like parents being absent or uninvolved, to something as simple as not getting a want fulfilled. For example, a parent might refuse to buy a phone or say no to a sleepover, and the teen interprets that refusal as being uncared for. In reality, the parent may be acting responsible, but to the child, it feels like rejection. Now, neglect can also come from real pressures parents face. A mom or dad working 2 jobs to keep food on the table may be less emotionally available. The parents may think, I'm doing everything I can, and they're right, but the child may still experience that absence as neglect. That's why education matters. We need to help teens understand what true neglect is. The consistent absence of emotional support, care, or attention versus the frustrations of not always getting what they want. Without that clarity, subjectivity takes over and the word neglect gets thrown around loosely. Another point, all right, so children and teens don't always have the language to describe what they feel. I mentioned that earlier. They might say, I feel neglected, when what they really mean is, I feel lonely, or I feel like no one hears me. because they can't always put complex emotions into words. They simplify. And sometimes that simplification twists the truth in their mind. Confusion turns into frustration. Frustration can turn to anger. And once anger takes hold, it reinforces their belief that no one cares. And groomers know this. Groomers are very big on playing emotion. And even though the child may not be able to express it, the groomer can. The groomer knows how to read it. Trust me. This is where miscommunication can spiral into bigger issues. A parent believes they're doing their best. A teen feels misunderstood, and the gap between intention and perception widens. Okay, so do you think emotional neglect is harder to recognize than abuse? What's your thoughts on that? So I'm going to say absolutely. Emotional neglect is often invisible compared to abuse. Abuse leaves marks, bruises, scars, medical reports. Emotional neglect leaves patterns, behaviors, and feelings that can only be recognized if someone truly knows the child. It's patterns. A neglected child might not say, "I'm being neglected." Instead, they may act out, withdraw, lose interest in school, or cling too tightly to peers and online relationships. But those behaviors can be easily misread. A teacher might think they're just moody. A parent might think they're just teenage rebellion. The signs are subtle, and without context, they get missed. To really see emotional neglect, you have to know the child at multiple levels, how they behave normally, how they communicate, what makes them feel secure, and how they process disappointment. Only then can you tell when something is missing or broken. This makes emotional neglect more dangerous in some ways than abuse because it flies under the radar. It doesn't set off alarm bells right away, and by the time someone realizes what's happening, the teen may already be deeply disconnected, seeking validation and comfort elsewhere, sometimes in unsafe places. And that's extremely important. And I'll get to it later, but that's why you have to understand why the child feels that way. Because even though you may, I'm not neglecting you, okay, but it doesn't change the fact that the child feels neglected. So you have to understand where that perspective is coming from. You can't just outright deny it and say, "I'm not neglecting you," because in the child's mind, they may feel that way. So it's not about calling them out on what you feel is incorrect, but rather, okay, I'm sorry you feel that way. Can you tell me why you feel that way? You have to build from their perspective. And that's where it ties back to Celeste. We don't know if emotional neglect played a role for her, but it's possible that feelings of being misunderstood, unheard, or disconnected contributed to why she ran. If she couldn't find validation at home, or if she simply didn't recognize the love that was there, she may have sought it elsewhere, which could have left her vulnerable to outside influence. And I think that could play out here. Now, I want to go to abuse or unsafe conditions. Now, again, I'm trying to cover as many possibilities as I can. So the parents' view is parents accused of abuse may deny it and insist their discipline is misunderstood. They do it, guys. They downplay what they've done. They minimize what they've done. Teens' view, if a teen truly feels unsafe, even minor incidents can snowball into a constant state of fear. So in Celeste's case, rumors circulated about bruises, but nothing has been verified. And how do we know the bruises didn't come from him? So again, that's just rumor mill. This shows how quickly perception can become truth in the media. So should unverified abuse claims be treated as fact by the media? So this is where we have to be extremely careful. We live in an age where there's a rush for transparency, where the media wants to report everything quickly, often before the facts are established. But transparency without facts doesn't serve the truth. Instead, it creates a whirlwind of assumptions. And you see that a lot lately because there's a rush to push things through, but there's no context in what's being pushed through. And once these assumptions are repeated enough times, they harden into beliefs. They become the story, even if they were never grounded in fact. And once a belief is planted in the public's mind, it's a mountain to climb to shift that mindset back, even if the truth later comes out. Now, yes, abuse leaves marks, and sometimes those marks can be noted or documented. But when the source of the claim is unknown or unverifiable, there is a danger in presenting it as fact. The better approach is to share possibilities, framed objectively and fairly with no judgment. We can say this is one of several possibilities investigators may be looking at, but we must avoid skewing or biasing one possibility above the others without evidence, because once judgment spreads, it rarely gets reeled back in. And that's especially true in Celeste's case. There were rumors about bruises, as I mentioned, but no verified records. Yet the phrase troubled home stuck, partly because of the way these unverified suggestions were handed publicly. So again, you got the troubled home, but then with the little seasoning of other things that define trouble home, because trouble home could be very ambiguous in nature. But if I start seasoning it a certain way, seasoning it, whatever, you know what I mean. If I start to sprinkle some layers of where I want it to go, however subtly but unverifiable, like I spoke to a source of mine, but I can't give up that source, or whatever it is, then you start actually creating the narrative you want, because we are slowly picking up the little things that you're dropping, shaping the narrative a bit without us even knowing. And then eventually troubled home becomes that one definition, like the guy I watch. I don't know if he truly believes what he just said or if he was influenced to say it. Now, how should investigators handle runaway cases where abuse is suspected but unproven? So investigators don't have the luxury of ignoring an allegation. Even if it's unverified, it must be taken seriously because protecting the child is paramount. That's where what I call a universal precaution approach comes in. That means until the facts are sorted out, you err on the side of safety. You increase oversight, you check for risk factors, you put safeguards in place, but you don't immediately jump to judgment. You treat the possibility as something to investigate, not as something already proven. It's also important to remember that abuse isn't one size fits all. Physical, emotional, sexual, or neglect each requires a different kind of assessment and protection strategy. The response has to be tailored. But here's the delicate piece. Sometimes teens can weaponize allegations, maybe out of frustration, maybe as a way to gain independence, to escape. Maybe out of frustration, maybe as a way to gain independence or to escape consequence, or even to punish a parent during conflict. Most teens don't fully grasp the weight of their words. That making a false or exaggerated claim can have lasting consequences on their family, even if the truth later comes out. So that's why investigators need balance, that treat every claim as serious enough to check, but also maintain fairness and objectivity. And society has to help kids understand that while their voice matters, their words also carry power and responsibility. I'll be honest with you, I see it in prison all the time too. False allegations in an effort to get some level of control. Peer pressure and outside influence. You have to put this in there because we believe there was grooming. So parents often underestimate how strong peer influence can be, believing their authority outweighs friends or online voices. You got to remember, these are teenagers now. They're breaking away from parent influence and trying to discover who they are. But this is when the peers start to come in. Team views to a teen, friends, and digital communities may feel more validating than family. Peer groups can glamorize, escape, or convince them they'll be supported if they leave. I wanted to mention that because every time she said David, maybe she was running away, how many people made the effort to stop her? Say, hey, listen, I know it's great that he's a celebrity, but he's also a lot older than you are. Or are they too caught up in the fact that he's a celebrity and pushing her to do it? Maybe that gave her status, which we'll talk about. So how much influence do you think peers and online communities really have in cases like this? In cases like Celeste, peers and online communities can have enormous influence. And it's not just surface level influence. It can fundamentally shift how a young, impressionable teenager sees themselves, their family, and the world around them. Here's where grooming comes into play. A skilled groomer doesn't just try to persuade, they reframe the victim's thinking until the teen believes the new ideas are their own. That's the true danger. A child doesn't feel manipulated. They feel like they're making independent choices, when in reality, those choices have been carefully engineered. And that's also why teens defend the groomer so strongly. The relationship becomes intertwined with their identity, their independence, their freedom. So in their mind, to reject the groomer is to admit they weren't really in control. And that's a painful realization. So instead, they double down and protect the very person exploiting them, because to them, it feels like protecting their own autonomy. That is why grooming is such a powerful driver of runaway behavior. It doesn't happen all at once. It's a staged process. And guys, I gave you prior in an article, and I think in another video, 6 stages on grooming, but it could adapt and adjust. I got 6 stages here, and there's a little adaptation because I want to relate it more to Celeste's case. So the first thing I got is targeting, and runaways are easy target. They're vulnerable, right? Their perspective of a troubled home is a great way to start. The groomer identifies a vulnerable teen, often one expressing unhappiness or conflict. So I'm going to fuel that. Definitely as a groomer, I'm going to fuel that. That's a great way to get a divide and some level of isolation. Then you got gaining trust. They show empathy, listen more than the family does, and build a secret bond. They basically say what the teenager wants to hear. Then they meet the needs. They position themselves as the solution, offering validation, gifts, attention, romance. And then there's the isolation, which I partnered with Running Away. That's why I feel it could be manufactured. Because if I'm looking to isolate that individual, I may not be able to go to her, but I can get her to come to me. So the groomer slowly creates a wedge between the teen and their support system. Your parents don't understand you. They don't want you to be happy. And then they redefine the truth. The teen begins to see home as the problem and the groomer as the answer. What was once discipline now feels like oppression. What was once conflict now feels like danger. And then the control and maintenance. Once the teen runs away or cuts off ties, the groomer gains full control, emotionally, physically, sometimes sexually. But the manipulation doesn't stop there. The groomer reinforces dependence, making the teen believe they can't survive without them. And even if the teen feels lost or scared, they're pulled back because the groomer has become the only safe place left. Running away is often not random rebellion. It's the engineered outcome of this process. The groomer plants division, fosters isolation, and manufactures a belief system where escape feels like freedom, even though it leads straight into control. As I did my little survey today, runaways do come from good homes. And that shows that there's got to be influence somewhere. Who's getting a teenager who's living in a good home to leave that home? It's got to be someone that has an influence with them. And if you're David and you're a celebrity and you got that social status, influence automatically comes with that. That's why with celebrities, when they do things that are foolish, sorry, if you put yourself in that spotlight where you could be influenced, where you have the ability to influence many at a mass scale, I'm sorry, man. It's not that a human can be perfect, but you better strive every day to be. Because that's the part of the responsibility of putting yourself in the spotlight. You have to hold yourself to standards because people are watching you. But more importantly, people are idolizing you. Kids. I mean, I get we're all human. But part of being a celebrity is taking on the responsibility of being that influence. A good, solid, respectable influence. So do you believe outside influence played a role in Celeste's choices? Yes, I do, because when you look at grooming patterns, the overlap is striking. Celeste was active online. She had repeated runaway episodes. She may have been in contact with someone older, possibly even romantically connected. That's David. All of these are indicators of outside influence at work. Now, the sad truth is that grooming doesn't just lure a child into relationship. It changes the way they see everything else. It reprograms their trust. And if Celeste was groomed, then outside influence didn't just play a role. It may have been the central reason why she viewed her home the way she did. And I want to leave that out there. That's why I'm so passionate about this, the troubled home, how it's defined, because I have connected what I'm pushing forward to the grooming aspect. And I don't want to minimize the fact that grooming could have been a part of how she views what she sees at home, how skewed it is. And we start buying into the other side, then you could be minimizing the impact of the groomer. So again, I may have been the central reason why she viewed her home the way she did, why she kept running away, and why she may have been vulnerable to the dangers that followed. There's a lot here, guys, so bear with me, guys. But I hope it's good content. Let me know. I got to talk about the romantic and secret relationships. Again, that does fall into grooming, but it's a whole nother level. So the parents may view it like parents often dismiss young romance as puppy love. They may forbid relationships to protect their child, especially if the partner is older. Makes sense. But for a teen, a secret or forbidden romance can feel like the most important thing in the world, and losing it may feel worse than losing They're home. I guess that's the only exchange there, right? Because they're willing to run away. So what do I have to lose? My home? But I get him. I get David. I'm going to go to David. In runaway cases, romance is often the most powerful pull factor. It's not mental health. It's not always a home where it's abusive. Some cases, the kids that are being abused at home sadly don't run away because they feel trapped and they're scared. But the power of what you think is love, that can move mountains. That can move mountains. So why are secret relationships so powerful at this age? Well, especially today with technology, secret relationships can be even more powerful than they were in the past. You know, kids live online. They know more about apps and platforms than their parents. And the reality is parents can't monitor them 24/7. A lot of what shapes the teens' thinking happens on their personal screens, often in private corners of TikTok, Discord, Roblox, Fortnite, whatever, and other platforms where adults rarely go. This is where groomers thrive. They meet kids exactly where they are in those online spaces, and they use those venues to exploit them. Think about Celeste's case. David's presence was on TikTok, a platform she already lived in. That overlap creates a kind of shared world where parents aren't present, which makes the bond feel even stronger. And here's the danger. It's not just influence. It's one-sided access. Parents might set rules and try to guide their kids, but they don't know what's happening in the dark, what's whispered in private messages, what's reinforced on live streams, what's encouraged by peers. Meanwhile, the groomer knows everything the teen shares. They're handed the vulnerabilities directly, unfiltered. And that makes it almost impossible for parents to counteract because they're fighting blind. So secrecy becomes powerful, not just because it's forbidden, but because it feels like freedom, identity, and protection rolled into one. For a teen, secrecy is thrilling. For a groomer, it's the perfect weapon. Shh. S-H-H-H-H. Sign of control. Secrecy is the perfect weapon. Perfect sign of control. There's the shh, and it's tattooed. That's control. It's obsession. I said that from day one. What's the shh for? It's secrecy. And for a groomer, secrecy is the greatest weapon. Right there. Said right there. How do older partners exploit this dynamic with vulnerable teens? I hope if you guys find this useful, you share it with other parents, because not only am I expressing the concerns, I'm expressing how to deal with these concerns. Older partners adapt. Older partners adapt to whatever vulnerability the teen already carries. That's what makes grooming so effective. They play the role the child is missing. If the teen feels dependent, the older partner provides help. If the teen feels alone, the groomer becomes their friend. If the teen feels misunderstood, the groomer suddenly gets them. And if the teen feels unloved, the groomer floods them with affection and validation. It's like a chameleon effect. The groomer molds themselves into whatever the teen needs, and little by little, they become the teen's only trusted resource. They can't have counter influence. I gotta have the person isolated. And Runaway is a great way to make it look like the child's making that choice, which we know they're not, and it gets them where you want them to be as the groomer. From the teen's perspective, this doesn't feel like manipulation. It feels like being seen and valued for the first time. And that's why they'll defend the groomer even against their own family. It becomes even more dangerous when age comes into play. Legally, a 15-year-old like Celeste cannot consent, but a groomer can blur that line by convincing the teen she's more mature than other kids, or that the law doesn't apply to special relationships like ours. That framing allows the teen to dismiss her own age as irrelevant. It gets into the teen's head. Where even if the teen thought, man, but he is older than me, but I'm different though. I'm not like the normal 14-year-old girls. She starts to believe that the relationship isn't wrong, only that outsiders don't understand. They don't understand me. They don't understand how mature I am. And they're definitely not going to understand us. So at that point, even if the teen knows something feels off, they justify it in ways that protect the groomer. Wrong becomes subjective. the law becomes negotiable and secrecy deepens, making intervention harder because he has embedded his truth in her, and her truth is what she believes of herself. I'm mature, so of course I deserve to be with him. I'm not a regular 14-year-old girl. Then I wanted to cover the mental health struggle. So the parents' view here is parents may confuse depression with typical teen moodiness, not recognizing when it does cross into crisis, because that could be a reason. And teens' view is teens often lack the language to say, I'm depressed. Instead, they say things like, I can't take it anymore, or I need to leave. So again, they don't recognize the emotion or the mental health concern. I'm depressed may not even be in their vocabulary, but they try to look to escape it. So it's good for parents to be able to recognize that, because you may be the one that has to help give some anchor to what they're going through, so you don't escape it, but you face it. So should runaway investigations consider mental health as much as home environment? Of course, they absolutely should, because mental health struggles can skew how a teen experiences parenting, even when the intent from parents is good. A parent might provide structure, guidance, and care, but if the teen is struggling with depression, anxiety, trauma, or identity issues, those same actions can feel like rejection, oppression, neglect. That's why it's so important not to view a troubled home label in isolation. We need context. A full picture means looking at multiple components. The household dynamic. Are parents engaged, supportive, or absent? Great question to ask. The parents' intent. Are rules being set for safety and structure, or as control and punishment? Another great question. The teen's mental health lens. Is anxiety or depression making even normal parenting feel unbearable? Great question. And perception versus reality. How do both sides see the same events differently? So if investigators only focus on the home, they risk blaming parents unfairly. If they only focus on the teen's perception, they risk missing underlying mental issues. It's only when you put both lenses together that you start to see what actually is happening. Now, how do we balance teen perception with what actually is happening in the home? So balancing perception with reality means building understanding between both parties and recognizing that both experiences are real, but not always aligned. Remember, I said earlier that if the child feels a certain way, and I may not believe that's the case, I'm not going to outright call the child a liar. I'm not going to call them out. I'm going to try to understand their perspective, because my job is not whether I don't want to win this argument. It's not an argument to win. I need a resolution. So I'm not here to challenge how she feels. Who am I to challenge that? I got to understand it. And I have to do that from her perspective. So, or his perspective. So for the teen, so again, balanced perception with reality means building understanding between both parties and recognizing that both experiences are real, but not always aligned. For the teen, their feelings are real, even if their interpretation of events isn't fully accurate. A curfew can feel like punishment when it was meant as protection. A parent's silence, again, it's about feeling. How do you feel about that rule? Well, I feel like you're punishing me. Well, why is that? And then try to build from there so they can understand. Doesn't mean you have to change the rule, but sometimes it's good to give an explanation, because maybe they can understand your perspective. A parent's silence can feel like rejection when it was exhaustion from work. A curfew can feel like punishment when it was meant as protection. I think I said that. And a correction can feel like criticism when it was actually an attempt for guidance. Now, for the parent, their intent may be loving and protective, but intent doesn't erase the impact on the child who feels misunderstood or unseen. And parents often assume kids know their love and support, but kids need it expressed in ways they can actually feel it. So you got to understand the kid's perspective. Now, for investigators or professionals looking at runaway cases, the job isn't to take a side. It's to understand the disconnect between intent and impact, between home reality and teen perception. That gap is often where runaway behavior grows. Now, at the core, runaway cases should never be reduced to the home was bad or the teen was dramatic. The truth is almost always, hold on one second, guys. I lost my place. Hold on. Bear with me. Naughty dog. Hold on. It just skimmed up for a reason. Where are we? The home. Here it goes. At the core, runaway cases should never be reduced to the home was bad or the teen was dramatic. The truth is almost always layered. part household conflict, part adolescent perception, and often part mental health struggle that distorts the picture. Could it ever be one on the extreme of either one? Of course it could be, but most of the time it's somewhere in the middle of all that mess, all that chaos. And again, it's like we're doing a show like today. I could easily bounce extremes, make it for a quick show. But it's complicated, it's complex, and to literally say people only run away for those reasons and not understand the complexity of just perspective and subjectivity. So seeking independence, parents' view. Parents often think my child isn't ready to be on their own. They see running away as rebellion or immaturity. A teen may believe independence is proof of maturity. So running away becomes a test of strength, even if they're unprepared for the reality. Could be that way with Celeste. Celeste had multiple runaway episodes in 2024 suggesting she was testing her independence. So do repeated runaway incidents look like rebellion or a cry for help? So the truth is, it depends on who's doing the interpreting and where they place their empathy. It's that simple. So some lean towards the parents, seeing them as doing their best, doing the best they can under difficult circumstances, while others lean towards the child, believing that even if the teen makes poor choices, the parents could have done more. And I heard that today. On one of the podcasts. The reality is usually somewhere in between. Every repeat runaway has its own context. Sometimes it's rebellion, a teen testing limits, chasing independence, or rejecting authority. Other times it's a cry for help, signaling that something deeper like mental health struggles, abuse, or grooming is pulling the teen away. And in many cases, it's a mix of both. A teen rebelling against rules while simultaneously being lured towards something or someone outside the home. Bingo. Hello, David. How are you? That's why the most important question isn't, is it rebellion or help seeking, but what's driving it this time? Without that distinction, parents and investigators risk making assumptions that can either excuse real danger or unfairly place blame. Now, how should parents and authorities respond to repeat runaways? The biggest mistake is to lump to assumptions. It's easy to look at repeated runaways and say the parents must be neglectful or this teen is just being rebellious, but either extreme misses the complexity. A balanced response means, well, for parents, they need to avoid taking runaway behavior only as defiance. Instead, they should ask, what need is my child trying to meet by leaving? Is it freedom, validation, escape from stress, or something darker? And at the same time, parents can't excuse every runaway episode as just a phase. Patterns deserve closer attention. I learned that in corrections. You got to observe patterns, but it's got to be connected to a bigger picture or else the patterns don't connect. So I have to understand what I'm looking at, and that will define the patterns. It's like if I give you a puzzle, I can give you the box, and you can use the pieces to build the creation because you got the box, you got the bigger picture, you know what it's supposed to be. But if I take the cover away, I'll give you the pieces, but you don't know how they fit, what they apply, what they're supposed to be in the end game, and it's a lot harder to figure it out. And to be honest with you, sometimes in cases like this, that's what we're doing. We're building a puzzle without knowing what that cover is. So for authorities, they must resist treating repeat runaways as routine. Repeated incidents don't mean the child is safer. In fact, they may be at greater risk because predators target runaways quickly. Every episode should be treated as high risk until proven otherwise. I always put the community here. Also, for the community, understanding is key. Not every runaway signals an abusive home. Sometimes it's about the difficulty of managing a rebellious teen, and rebellious teens bring their own risk. Experimenting with drugs, getting involved with older peers, being more easily manipulated online, or putting themselves in unsafe environments. So at the end of the day, repeated runaways aren't just statistics, they're signals. Whether the signal is rebellion, a cry for help, or both, parents and investigators need to respond with urgency and without judgment, because each runaway attempt increases the chance of harm. Because, it's sort of like the prison setting, but when people cry urgency and they manipulate it, they weaponize it, you tend to, the response tends to have a little bit of erosion in that urgency, because you automatically assume it's the boy that cried wolf. The outcome's going to be the same, someone manipulating the system. But what about if it's not? So even though you have a repeated runaway, you still got to keep it with the same urgency. And you got to ask yourself, hey, she ran away 5 times, but am I still treating it with the same urgency as if it's the first? School or social pressure. So parents may not fully realize how bullying, failing grades, or social rejection affect their child. And teens' views for a teen, school is their world. A bad day at school feels like a bad life. If they don't feel supported at home, school pressures can push them out the door. So, how much responsibility should school carry in spotting at-risk kids? Schools play a massive role in this conversation because they are embedded in the day-to-day lives of kids. I said this in another episode. For even 7 hours a day, 5 days a week, teachers, coaches, and school staff are in the trenches with them. They overhear the chatter in the hallways, see the trends that kids are following, and pick up on subtle shifts in moods or behavior that even parents may not catch. Now, by the way, I didn't say schools should replace parents, but they are in a position to be first responders when it comes to spotting red flags. So if a child suddenly withdraws, changes appearances, stops engaging in class, or starts bragging about risky behavior, teachers are often the first to notice. I'm going to have to go back to corrections. We often say that the officers who work closest with the inmates understand the culture best because they're immersed in it. Same is true here. Teachers and staff are immersed in the teenage culture and they can see patterns that others miss. But this can't be a one-sided responsibility. Parents need to work in partnership with schools. Too often, families see educators as outsiders who shouldn't interfere, but a healthy collaboration means parents ask questions, listens to feedback, and treat teachers as allies. This isn't about judgment or blame. It's about sensible curiosity. Parents being willing to hear what teachers notice and using that information to better protect their children. Now, could school pressure again? We talked about peer pressure, but I want to go with school pressure real quick because I have another angle here. I have played a role in what happened to Celeste. I want to add something here. Even though I covered peer pressure before, I want to add something specific here about social status. So in Celeste's case, it doesn't appear the traditional school pressure like grades or bullying were the main drivers. Not that I know of. It doesn't mean it can't be. But at this point, there's nothing there to say that she was failing us. We don't know her school records. What did surface, though, was her need for validation and status among peers. She was openly telling classmates that she was with David, a claim that carried shock value. And it's funny because you would figure maybe she would know the law, the rules, but yet she still felt the need to tell people she was with David. So this was about social validation. This is about letting her peers know that, hey, no matter what you say about me, I'm with the celebrity. It's a claim that carried shock value for a teenager. That kind of attention can elevate social standing, even if it's rooted in something inappropriate or unsafe. But here's the critical point. While she may have used her story to boost status, that same peer environment could have also served as a corrective pressure. If her peers had pushed harder, asked more questions, expressed more concern, remember, I saw the video with the ex-boyfriend. He said he could have done more. Or sought adult intervention, maybe her perception of the relationship would have been challenged. Her ex-boyfriend, Damien Hernandez, admitted that people around her could have done more but didn't. Or in his case, he could have done more. That's where peer pressure cuts both ways. It can reinforce risky behavior, but it can also disrupt it if peers choose to step up. Now, in Celeste's case, it seems like much of the concern stayed at the surface level. Maybe kids whispered about it, but maybe some questioned her, but no one pressed deeply enough to change the trajectory. So while academic stress or bullying doesn't appear to be central here, the school setting still mattered. Not because it pushed her away, but because it missed an opportunity to pull her back. That's powerful, right? It didn't push her away, but it didn't take advantage of the opportunity to pull her back. And again, I got that from the interview. So I want to talk about substance use because remember, guys, I still want to connect to the thing that there could have been an overdose here and that they could have overreacted. I could be wrong. I mean, who knows with this case, to be honest with you. I saw this because of the sloppiness of putting her in the front, especially a car registered to him. But then it also made sense because they wouldn't want to call the police because it would expose minimal reckless behavior with a minor, but it questioned the connection he had with a minor. So the parents' view would be parents may deny or minimize their child's exposure to drugs, assuming not my kid. And then the teens' view may be teens may see drugs as an escape or a way to belong, not realizing the risk. In runaway cases, drug use often intersects with vulnerability and grooming. So do you think substance abuse or substance use or risky peer groups could have contributed to Celeste's situation? When we talk about teens who run away, substance use can't be ignored. It doesn't always start as addiction. Sometimes it's about curiosity, rebellion, or just wanting to feel older. So for a runaway teen, substances like alcohol, marijuana, or pills can feel like a shortcut to adulthood, freedom without restriction, fun without rules. But that freedom often comes with chains attached. Now, the reality is that many runaways find themselves around older peers or adults who have easy access to substances that kids their age can't legally buy. That creates an imbalance of power. The adult or older friend becomes the provider, and in return, the teen feels indebted. What may have started as just drinking or smoking quickly becomes a form of leverage. Basically, don't tell your parents, and if you want more, you have to keep this secret. This is when grooming overlaps with substance use. Groomers use alcohol or drugs not just to gain compliance, but to break down barriers. Under the influence, a teen's judgment is clouded, their resistance is lowered, and their perception of danger is blurred. So over time, the substance becomes a hook, a reason to come back, and the groomer becomes the only one who can provide it. What feels like freedom to the teen is actually control in disguise. Now, with Celeste, we don't yet know what toxicology will show, but one theory investigators are considering, as I mentioned, is overdose or drug exposure. Even if that is never confirmed, it's still important to understand how substances function as a gateway in these situations. They don't just place teens in risky environments, they can transform risky environments into traps. That's the added element. Now, should police treat drug exposure as a major warning sign in runaway cases? Absolutely. Drug exposure isn't just a bad choice or on the part of the teen. It's often a signal that adults or older influences are in play. If a 15-year-old is using someone, if a 15-year-old is using, someone supplied it. And whoever supplied it may also be supplying pressure, secrecy, and unsafe spaces. And do we ever follow through on that? Yeah, I know you're getting drugged, but who's supplying it to you? Because understanding who that is can give you pressures, what secrets are being held, where you're going to get the drugs. That's why law enforcement has to treat any evidence of substance use in a runaway as more than just a health concern. It's a red flag for exploitation. It can indicate the presence of predators, unsafe peer groups, or environments where harm is normalized. If substances do play a role in Celeste's case, the question shifts from did she use to who gave it to her and why. Because the who and the why often reveal far more about the danger than the substance itself. Why troubled homes is misleading without context. That I want to go back to that because we're getting ready to wrap up. So troubled homes can mean anything from strict rules to outright abuse. It blurs lines. In Celeste's case, the label comes mostly from her perspective and peer stories, not official reports. So the parents' view is families may feel unfairly judged by a vague label that paints them as abusive without evidence. And the teens' view, teens may embrace the phrase as validation of their feelings, even if outsiders see their home differently. So do you think troubled homes is too broad to describe what really happened? Yes, it's far too broad. Troubled homes is one of those phrases that sounds definitive, but really isn't. It's subjective, and without context or specifics, it can mean completely different things to different people. For one teenager, a troubled home might mean strict curfews, rules about social media, or parents who don't allow sleepovers. For another, it could mean genuine dysfunction, abuse, neglect, addiction, or violence. And yet the same two words, troubled home, get applied to both. That's the danger here. It leaves us filling in the blanks with our own assumptions. We picture the worst case scenarios when in reality, we don't know what Celeste meant when she used phrases like that or how much of it reflected her teenage perception rather than the actual conditions of her home. Context matters. So if we don't know whether if she was frustrated or abused, or then repeating troubled home over and over in headlines doesn't clarify anything. It clouds it. It makes speculation look like fact. And in Celeste's case, the media has largely run with her perspective about providing Celeste's case. And in Celeste's case, the media has largely run with her perspective without providing hard evidence or specifics. Specifically, I'm going to run away. I'm running away. And everybody automatically assumed whatever else followed that. That doesn't mean her feelings weren't real, though. Teenagers interpret the world through a lens of emotion and immediacy. If she felt misunderstood, restricted, or pulled between her parents' rules and her relationships with David, that could have been enough for her to describe her home as troubled. But that's not the same as proving her family environment was objectively unsafe. So yes, troubled home is too broad. We need details, definitions, and context. Otherwise, it's just a label that risks oversimplifying her story and unfairly shifting blame without proof. Guys, last 2 sections. So why teens like Celeste are at risk? Runaways often receive less urgent law enforcement response. Studies show within 48 hours, most ones are approached by predators, and repeated runaway episodes normalize absence and delays action. Let's talk about the erosion of trust. So why runaways cases should be treated as high risk? So the question I have here is, should all runaway cases be treated as high risk from the very beginning? I'm going to say yes. Now, they should. I know it sounds difficult, maybe even unrealistic, because traditionally law enforcement prioritizes abductions higher. In abduction, there's an immediate fear that the person has been taken against their will and in physical danger right now. That urgency makes sense, but here's where runaways can be just as dangerous. When a teen runs away, especially under the influence of a groomer, their willpower is being taken too, not physically, but emotionally. They're not making choices from a place of full independence. They're making choices under manipulation. And the scary truth is that the person they're running towards may not be a stranger in their mind. Stranger danger doesn't really cover everything anymore, because if you're on social media platforms, you're going to know who that person is or have an idea of who that person is. Groomers work to become trusted figures, friends, confidants, celebrities, even romantic partners. To the teen, they may feel safe, but in reality, they're stepping into the most unsafe situation of all. That's why runaway cases should carry the same urgency as abductions. A child on the run is vulnerable to predators, drugs, trafficking, exploitation, and violence. And here's the key. Whether a child leaves willingly or unwillingly, they usually don't fully understand the consequences. So willing or not, they're still in danger. And then it says, do you think Celeste's repeated disappearances may have led authorities to underestimate the danger? Yes. Celeste was known as a chronic runaway. And when a teen runs away multiple times but eventually comes home, the urgency begins to erode. People stop treating it like a crisis and start treating it like a pattern. Thinking becomes, she'll be back. She always comes back. But that assumption misses something vital. Each time a child runs away, the risk escalates. Groomers thrive on repetition. Each runaway event creates deeper dependence, more isolation, and more secrecy. What starts as a teenager testing independence can spiral into full-blown control by an outside influence. As you can see, our runaways probably got longer and longer and longer. In Celeste's case, every time she left, the risk grew because grooming doesn't stay static. It builds. Promises get bigger, threats get sharper, and emotional hooks sink deeper. So while the pattern of repeated runaway may have looked predictable to authorities, the truth is that the danger was compounding with every disappearance. So that's the lesson here. Repetition doesn't mean safety. Repetition means escalation. And that's why habitual runaways should never be dismissed as routine. They may be walking straight back into the arms of someone who's tightening their grip. So I got my closing thoughts. And guys, thanks for dealing with me. There was a lot here, but I got some closing thoughts that I took note of that I would like to also read to finalize. Hopefully this is some good information. I know it's a lot, guys, but as you can see how I do my shows, I try to cover as much as I can. So, if you stayed the whole way, that's awesome. It really is, because in the process, I learn. So do you think the media oversimplified Celeste's story by calling it a troubled home? Yes, I do. Troubled homes is a phrase that oversimplifies a very complex reality. The truth is, a troubled home isn't one thing. It's layered in context, perception, and perspective. For a teenager, it may simply mean frustration with rules, restrictions, or expectations, but for the media, it becomes a buzzword, something that sounds definitive but leaves out the details. The danger here is that when the media runs with a surface-level definition based on bias or assumption, it can misdirect the entire conversation. Once that narrative picks up momentum, it's hard to pull it back. Instead of focusing on Celeste as a victim and understanding unique pressures she's faced, the public becomes fixated on an undefined label. And at that point, the label does nothing to help the victim. It only clouds the truth. The home's to blame. She ran away. Whoa, guys, what happened to David here? Where's David in all this now? So could repeated runaways have been a cry for help that wasn't heard? Yes, but we have to frame it carefully. So Celeste's repeated runaways may not have been her consciously crying for help. What may have been happening was more subtle. Each runaway reinforced the control of a groomer. She may not have been screaming out loud, but her actions were signaling that she was being pulled deeper into someone else's influence. That is how grooming works. Each time she returned to him, it wasn't just another runaway. It was a reinforcement of his power. Every reconnection built a stronger leash. The stardom element made it worse. When someone has celebrity status or influence, the grooming isn't just private manipulation. It becomes wrapped in admiration and validation. That magnifies control. To the outside world, it might look like rebellion, but in reality, it could have been submission to someone else's grip. So yes, repeated runaways can be a cry for help, and in Celeste's case, it may have been a cry she wasn't even fully aware she was making because her will was being slowly replaced by someone else's. And the last part I got is, what do you think needs to change in how we respond to runaways before tragedies occur or happen? We need a shift in mindset. So too often we look at runaways as if they're only running away. I mean, what are they running away from, right? Conflict, away from home, away from problems. But we forget that they can also be running towards something. And when that something is a groomer, an older partner, or a risky peer group, the danger multiplies. That's why the response to runaways has to go deeper than recovery and return. We have to ask, what motivated this? Was it conflict, mental health, peer influence, or grooming? Because each one requires a different response. And they could also work in collaboration. So we also need to stop dismissing repeated runaways as just their pattern. Groomers manufacture runaways. Groomers manufacture runaways. They plant the vision in the teen's mind, redefine truth, and create the illusion that running away is the only way to find freedom. And in reality, it's a trap. So what has changed? So what has to change is urgency and depth. Every runaway case should be treated as high risk until proven otherwise. Investigators, schools, and families should look for both the away from and the towards, and we as society need to stop oversimplifying the reasons why kids leave. Only then can we interrupt the cycle before tragedy happens. So guys, there was a lot there. I worked on it a lot. I can always make this an article if you want it. Just let me know. Email me at ganjianthony@yahoo.com, and maybe it could be something that you may want to share. I could just run it through some system to quickly develop an article from it. But I hope this was a lot of information for you. I wanted to focus on, the Celeste's narrative, of course, because it's relevant, but I wanted to see if we can maybe touch on broader issues of teens running away, just to give an understanding, because maybe you can get ahead of it. But as always, guys, the show is Tear Talk. Thank you for all the subscribers. Keep them coming. I want to build, because I know I have a message to share, and that's the key. And feel free to check out my older content. Even the content on corrections is still good content. Even though now I'm going to stay focused on true crime, there's content in corrections that's very helpful because it could be applied in outside cases. Elsewhere, I mean. As always, guys, stay safe.